USCHO.com. This is the USCHO Weekend Review podcast from U.S. College Hockey Online at USCHO.com. A look at this weekend in college hockey and a review of the top news of the week.
Welcome to USCHO Weekend Review for Monday, February 1st, 2021. I'm Ed Trefzger alongside Jim Connelly. Jim, last week we highlighted a lofty milestone, 1,100 wins for Jerry York, but that's not to diminish some other achievements along the way. Two head coaches hit landmarks over the weekend. Scott Sandelin got win number 400, the head coach at Minnesota Duluth, and at Bentley, Ryan Soderquist got his 250th win.
Yeah, hats off to both of them. And, it's another week and more milestones. It's nice to see. Obviously, Scotty Sandelin's done a great job there, and he feels like he just belongs in that program. And 400 wins is very, very noteworthy, as is Ryan Soderquist at Bentley. And that's a team that's just happy to be playing hockey right now. They get finally back to the ice. Yesterday was Sunday, and they'll play another game today, weather dependent, I assume. But they're supposed to take on Air Force again, and this is a program that's been hit pretty hard by COVID. They've missed a lot of games, so it's nice to see them back on the ice, and another great milestone. So hats off to both those coaches.
And for Ryan Soderquist, 19 seasons behind the bench, taking the team from the MAC, taking a team that is his alma mater from those days preceding Atlantic hockey, and playing in a not great community rink until now, where they have this nice jewel box, 1,917 seats, mirroring the year 1917 when Bentley University was founded. So there have been great strides made in that program, and he's been behind the helm for most of Bentley's history. So that's a great accomplishment. Well, we mentioned Jerry York to start off. He had a weekend off, and Boston College has held on to the number one spot in the USCHO.com poll. With North Dakota's split, Minnesota moved into the number 2 spot. Number 3, Minnesota State fell to Bemidji State. So a little shuffling at the top of the poll.
Yeah, it's interesting. I felt like, with BC being idle after their series against Boston University was postponed or I guess canceled. I don't know what the right word when we get COVID cases right now, how we're terming these series that don't get played. They will play Northeastern on Tuesday. Of note, it should have been Beanpot Monday as we're recording today. The Beanpot tournament, of course, has been canceled for the first time in its history. But, they were trying to play one Beanpot opponent, Boston University. They'll play a different Beanpot opponent, Northeastern. But, North Dakota and Minnesota State both were in great positions to maybe move up. We were actually talking about this offline, Ed. I held North Dakota at number 2 on my ballot. I gave number 1 to BC, but held North Dakota at number 2. And it's not a disrespect to Minnesota. It's just the fact that, they end up with a sweep of Ohio State this weekend. And, when I really look at that compared to North Dakota having to play Omaha, that's a very strong Omaha team. And they handled them on Friday night. They lose a close game on Saturday. But those two teams are going to play 6 times between now and the end of the season. And I think that those are probably, you can maybe throw St. Cloud in there as well, maybe Duluth, but I think those are the 2 best teams in the NCHC. So I don't discount the fact that North Dakota lost to an excellent opponent. So I know that it does seem that Minnesota, it will be the number 2 team, but I don't think that North Dakota is not as worthy as anybody of getting first place votes and possibly being a number 1 team. They're very good.
I think the score of Friday's game between North Dakota and Omaha is a bit misleading. I watched that game, and it was tight pretty well along until late. You throw in an empty netter, and that makes it look a little gaudy on the score sheet. But North Dakota had to really work hard to get that split with Omaha, whereas Minnesota seemed much more dominant. The Gophers, Bob Mosko's put together a team that has everything you want in a team. You've got solid blue liners, you've got offensive skill, and in Jack LaFontaine, you've got terrific goaltending. I mean, how could you ask for much more from a squad? They're going to be battling for number one and battling for a national championship for the rest of the season.
I agree, and I've been saying it for a number of weeks that they needed to get their offense going. Then they dump in 20 in a weekend against Arizona State, and suddenly now they're clicking. Their offense is moving, the offense is clicking, and if they keep putting pucks in the net at the rate that they are, they will be one of the toughest teams to beat. They have I think 4 potential All-Americans on their blue line. That's how strong their defense is. You mentioned LaFontaine. He's been, nearly flawless in net. So I think that we are looking at a Minnesota team that is poised to go on a run here. They had 3 losses in 4 games. That's their only blemishes to date on their entire schedule. But if they go on a run here at the end, if they finish the season with only 3 wins, you have to be thinking, if they finish this season with only 3 losses, you really have to be thinking that this is a Minnesota team that could be a national champion at the end.
I think right now, no matter how they pick the postseason tournament, you've got to think that Minnesota, they may be the only team that's definitely in. I think you can make the case also for Boston College, but those 2 teams, no matter how you slice it, they're going to have to be in the tournament with how they've played so far.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, BC has only played 10 games. They were doing really well in terms of getting games played, and then however the schedule worked out, I can't tell if it was meant to help them, knowing that they had a lot of guys that were going to be at World Juniors, but they didn't play for almost entire month by design. Now they're trying to kind of scramble and get some more games played. They haven't really been hit by COVID. They have just had opponents that they've lost on their schedule because of that. Now the week-to-week schedule for Hockey East, you figure that will be something that's beneficial. They throw Boston University on last weekend, and those games don't get played. So I know that BC won't be short on games at the end, but I think that Jerry York, if you talk to him, he'd like to get 12 games played between now and the end of the regular season, get him up to 22 at least. I think that would probably be a good goal.
Well, as we consider teams that have been on a bit of a roll, we have to think about Bemidji State. And as we record this, our poll guys are still tabulating the votes, but it looks like the Beavers will be back in the poll. They're 6-4-2. 3 of those wins are against Bowling Green. They've got a win and a tie against both Minnesota State and Lake Superior. And they've had 9 straight games against ranked WCHA opponents, 5-2-2 in that span. Tom Serratori's Beavers are doing a terrific job. And, all the conversation seems to have been Bowling Green and Minnesota State. But let's not forget Bemidji State.
It was really easy for Bemidji State to get lost because you did have a Minnesota State team that everybody had expectations for out of the gate. They started pretty well, and you had Bowling Green just running off right out of the gate. The final straw in all that is that the team that stopped them was Bemidji State. It was a 4-game series that they played against one another, and it was 3 out of 4 games that Bemidji came out on top. So one of those things that this team seems to be rolling, and if they keep rolling, then it's going to be hard to ignore them. And might they be better than Bowling Green? It's hard to tell. I think when I look at schedules, their schedule actually gets a lot easier. They only have 2 more games against teams that are currently ranked after, as you mentioned, playing 9 in a row against teams while they were ranked in the USCHO poll. So it certainly does feel that this is one of the hottest teams in the WCHA. We can't ignore Bemidji State anymore. This is a team that is moving on up, and they're here to stay.
While we're talking about the WCHA, and we mentioned Bowling Green, after a little bit of a stumble back in the W column with a sweep of Michigan Tech, a team that has been playing pretty decently as of late.
Yeah, and that I think that was another couple of games that you had to keep your eye on this weekend in the WCHA, and Bowling Green finds a way to win both of those games, tight games, both nights, but they come out on top. And Michigan Tech, as you mentioned, they had played well of late. They had jumped into the poll. I almost feel like Tech and Bemidji State is now going to flip-flop in the polls. You'll probably see Tech fall out. You'll see Bemidji State jump in. But, as I look at the WCHA, and I guess I don't want to get too far off on a tangent, but when you're thinking about teams that are going to make the NCAA tournament, and I don't think people were thinking 3 or 4 teams from the WCHA, but, with the insularity of the schedules and not really seeing how one conference stacks up against another, I feel like you have some really good teams in the WCHA right now. We don't know. It's just hard to make a comparison against the rest of the country. But there's probably going to be at least 3, maybe 4 teams when selections come around that you might be able to make a case for right out of the WCHA. And
I can just imagine what fun that's going to be selecting the field when they get into the room and do that.
I'm not putting my resume in for that.
No, and I think one of the criteria is going to have to be arm wrestling.
It might be. It's going to be difficult to just do this with an eye test, and I know everybody's been trying to figure out what's the right formula. It hasn't been figured out, and we're 7 weeks away from Selection Sunday. We're getting close. I feel like this is something maybe people have figured this out and they're just not going public with it at this point, but it feels like we need answers to a lot of questions soon.
We certainly do. And we've got some more questions and maybe some more answers coming up in just a moment when USCHO Weekend Review continues.
This is the USCHO Weekend Review podcast from US College Hockey Online.
This is Weekend Review from USCHO.com. I'm Ed Trefzger alongside Jim Connelly. I want to start out with a tweet that I saw over the weekend from former Wisconsin Badger Alex Turcotte. The entire tweet was #Caufield for Hobie. And that started to get some traction. But boy, you got to be talking Caufield for Hobie. He had a big weekend, 4 goals, 3 apples in the sweep of Michigan State. And number 1 in the nation, scoring 14-14-28 is the line. Goals, assists, in total in 18 games.
He's picked it up. I mean, he is as hot as any. Not that he ever was having any bad slumps in this season, but he's really playing right now. And and he's finding ways to score. It's on the power play. It's even strength. He's dominant on the penalty kill. I mean, this is a really, what do they call it in baseball? A 5-tool player? Or I don't know my baseball terminology, but that's what Cole Caufield feels like. He feels like that player that you can put him out there in any situation. He's going to be pretty dominant. And he started, I think, last week we were talking about David Ferentz at Boston University as maybe one of the first guys to come out as maybe a Hobie, candidate early here. And I know we've mentioned Dryden McKay, but boy, I mean, Caufield, if you weren't paying attention before this weekend, a 7-point weekend with 4 goals will certainly open your eyes. It's against Michigan State. Maybe the team hasn't been overly consistent, have not playing their best hockey of late, but 7 points, 4 goals in a weekend opens everybody's eyes.
In UMass's run to the national championship game, one of the people that was noticed on that team, to get noticed when you had a guy like Cale Makar on the team is a big deal. But that was goaltender Filip Lindberg. He is playing great this junior year for him. A sweep of Lowell by UMass, a big rivalry pair of games. 5-0 and 2-1, just 2 goals in his last 4 games allowed.
Yeah, and I think there was some frustration for everybody involved with UMass that, Lindberg allowed just 1 single goal against Providence the weekend prior, and they didn't win a game. They had a 0-0 tie and a 1-1 tie. So you could tell on Friday night that there was a little bit of extra fire in the UMass offense. They were really working hard to score goals, and they did so in spades. 5 goals against a good Lowell defense, typical Norm Bazin defense that doesn't give up a lot. Then on Saturday, it was a game I had the opportunity to call, and I thought that UMass looked great from the puck drop. I thought Lowell played a much better game on Saturday, and UMass still found a way to win. They had to survive a little bit in the third period when Lowell really put on some pressure, but that was Lindberg, and he made a save. It was probably about 7-8 minutes into the game. on a one-time shot. It was on the USCHO front page for much of Sunday, but a glove save where he didn't seem to have any business stopping the puck. He had to move so far from his right to left, makes that save. And, there is almost an embarrassment of riches, because you have a really good goaltender behind Lindberg and Matt Murray. When you're Greg Carvel, you don't really ever have to worry about the goaltending position. And now that Lindberg is hot, I do believe he'll be the guy that Carvel will probably turn to a lot down the stretch. But if you don't want, if you want to turn right back to Murray at any point, he's just as good of a goaltender. He'll be equally as ready.
Well, if you want to talk not having to worry about goaltenders, maybe we should talk about American internationals. Eric Lang, 3 wins on the week for the Yellow Jackets, who are now 13-3. They didn't allow a goal in the 2 games home and home with Holy Cross, and notably in the game against Holy Cross in Worcester on the road for AIC, 2 goaltenders played in that game. That's a very unselfish situation. Jake Kucharski, the freshman Carolina draft pick, and Ryan McKinchak split on that shutout, and then McKinchak got the shutout on Saturday. But a terrific couple of games for the netminders for AIC, but it really brings up the question about Atlantic hockey. If AIC should not be the league championship, and when you get down to single elimination rounds, as there will undoubtedly be for semifinals and finals, if you get down to that and that team is not the league champion, you really are going to have to make the case for AIC being an at-large in the tournament, in a situation where there's going to be a lot of battling about who's going to be at large.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people say that by the time the season ends, people will be loving the pairwise rankings. As much as we try to bash them so often, or as many people do year after year, they're going to be wishing we had the pairwise, because you're going to be in a situation. I mentioned the WCHA. I'm going to mention Atlantic hockey. Now, these are leagues that typically would have at most 2 teams. In Atlantic's case, it's usually 1. I think only once in the history have they had 2 teams in their tournament. And, here you could be in a situation where both of these leagues are looking to possibly put more teams in than typical, because there's been excellent performances. And at some point, I guess you do have to use your eyeballs, but it's hard to, take away from wins and losses. And we could be in a situation where, some of your better teams, let's use Boston University, for example. They're 5-1. We know that they're a good team. They're stacked with firepower. But what if they only get to 13 or 14 games played? You're going to have teams with 20 wins out there, and you're going to have a BU team that, might be 10-3, and you're trying to make a case for them over a team that's, 21-3. That it's going to be really difficult when you think about it. In AIC and Bemidji State and Minnesota State, Bowling Green, they're all kind of in this situation where if they don't win their tournament, they still probably deserve a lot of consideration for the NCAA field.
I think in the case of AIC, people are going to say, well, look at the competition, but you also have to look at how dominant they've been in a lot of their wins. And just kind of a little bit of trivia, this was the 3rd game against Holy Cross, 2nd and 3rd over the weekend. Holy Cross has yet to score a goal against the Yellow Jackets. Their first meeting at AIC was a 1-0 win by AIC in that game. So very interesting. But yeah, pairwise, people are going to be clamoring for it back, and very happy to
they
see
really
it.
will.
2 sweeps over the weekend in Hockey East to bring up. Later this week, we're going to have on our Spotlight podcast UConn head coach Mike Cavanaugh. His Huskies swept Merrimack over the weekend. They're 6-2-1 in their last 9 after starting out 1-4-1. And even when they were 1-4-1, they weren't playing bad hockey. This is a pretty good team.
I think it is, and it's easy to overlook a team that hasn't perennially been in the top 4, but they were really close to getting home ice in Hockey East last year, basically 1 win away, and they're putting themselves in a position. I think if they win a couple of games this upcoming week, then they'll be right there in a, top 4 position yet again. They're getting games played. I think they've played 15 to date, second most in Hockey East, and they're having some success. This is a team that has a lot of firepower. You had Johnny Evans scoring 4 goals against Merrimack, 4 in a row, if I remember right. After their team fell behind, he scored 4 in a row to put UConn back on top. So I like this team. They have a lot of good makeup in terms of goal scoring, a good goaltender on the back end in Tomas Vomachka. So I expect some good things for UConn down the stretch.
The other team with a sweep is Providence. It moved them 2 games over 500. They're 7-5-4 overall. They seem to have been hot and cold this season. You mentioned last weekend, home and home against UMass, 2 ties. They won 1 shutout and lost 1 shutout. I just, as I see Providence and I see the talent on that team, they just feel like they have been underachieving a little bit. Am I off on that?
I think they've got some holes in their team. They're not as deep as they were a year ago or 2 years ago. I think that this is a good Providence team. But consistency, we talk about it a lot with some of the Big Ten teams like Wisconsin and Michigan, that we know that they're good. They just have to be more consistent. I think the same goes for Providence. But, when they get going, they can score goals. I think that's a big confidence thing for them, is just how many times they can put pucks in the net. And obviously this weekend against New Hampshire, they found ways to win, especially Sunday's game. Fell behind that game 2-0 going into the third period. They score 3 in the third. And listen, I've been saying it all along, comebacks, even if you're at home, comebacks are difficult because you don't have that crowd to kind of inspire you, or you don't have the ability to shut up a road crowd to inspire you. So I think that to come back the way they did, I've seen them do it a couple of times this year, it should put this Providence team on the right direction. Now, can they stay consistent? What happens next weekend? Yet to be seen. But I think that there's some things, there's some areas that they're not that strong in. But I think in general, Providence should be one of the top teams in Hockey East still.
You brought up the crowd, and I think that's the other thing that people are going to more readily admit. In fact, I've heard some of the coaches we've talked to this season in our various podcasts more interested in agreeing with the idea that there's a lot of energy from crowds, where maybe they would be less active in doing that in the past. So Pairwise coming back, everybody's going to be happy. Crowds coming back, people are going to be even more happy.
I agree with you on both of those. Now, we have seen a few places, over this weekend. I noticed in Omaha having a crowd, and we've seen North Dakota. I believe I saw a small crowd at a couple of the Big Ten facilities. So we're seeing some crowds coming back, but those dominant crowds that can really change the outcome of a game just by, getting behind their team and, spurring on a team, giving them a little bit more energy. Teams are having to create their own energy right now. And I see that, night in, night out when I'm in arenas. It's difficult to create your own energy.
Well, another interesting weekend in college hockey, and a lot more coming up this week. So catch a game if you can. On Tuesday, we'll have USCHO Spotlight with Mike Cavanaugh. And later in the week, we'll talk to Mike Hastings from Minnesota State. For Jim Connelly, I'm Ed Trefzger, and we'll catch you next time.
This has been the USCHO Weekend Review Podcast, a production of U.S. College Hockey Online. Visit uscho.com/podcasts to listen or subscribe.